This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
This is a lot of fun. I'm usually on the other side, and thanks to Robert and Abby, and yeah, it's all going. It's all going. So I feel honored to be sandwiched between two wonderful presenters. We had last week Fred Burks, who was giving a wonderful talk, which when I walked in this evening, I saw all the posters on the wall here, and it fits in perfectly what we're going to talk about. And then next week, another dear friend, Dean Schrock, and then all the other friends here that are in the audience, which is a delight. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. What I'm going to talk about tonight is called the geometry. Let me back up a little bit. Symbolic wisdom of natural laws within us. And it's going to have a little geometry, but it's actually going to have a lot of other interesting stuff that talks about the ineffable, all-encompassing oneness that is at the heart of who we are and what we are, and how that actually transcends a lot of the symbols, but we can use the symbols as a way to get back to that awareness. So that's what I'm going to be sharing, and it's stuff we already know. So I'll begin with a few acknowledgments. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and very, very much heartfelt thanks for that. And it's always fun to see what a great community we have. And thanks to all the people on the RVML staff who are that's just a small handful. And also like to thank my parents for giving me the opportunity to be here in this physical form, and my wife Nancy, and one of our distinguished guests, Leonard and Sama, his wife here, who I just went to a wonderful, wonderful workshop this weekend. I can't say enough good things about, good words about his wonderful work. And I also want to acknowledge another significant influence this year. Gary Renard, who wrote a book called Disappearance of the Universe. And I'm going to talk about how all this stuff relates to a thing called quantum forgiveness. And that's kind of the gist, the overlying theme of the evening. And you're probably thinking, what does forgiveness have to do with geometry? Well, hopefully I can do that all together, and we'll make it somehow make sense. So there's a few books. There's tons of great books out there, of course. Leonard's got a wonderful book, which I don't even have here, so obviously there's numerous omissions of fabulous books that you should read. The ones that pertain to this particular talk in particular are in sort of chronological order. The Kabbalion, as far as my understanding of them and recognition of them, the one that I'll start with is called the Kabbalion, and that was by the Three Initiates. And this is a book on the Hermetic Laws. There's 7 Hermetic Laws that we'll go into in a certain level of detail that tie into principles that can be used for getting ourselves back into that state of alignment with our transpersonal selves and the awareness of coming from the heart space that is our natural state. The next one is Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard, which I'm going to talk about a bit, and the sequel to it, which is called Your Immortal Reality. I read these very quickly. They're both very fast reads, and they reminded me of how beautifully profound this fourth one, which is A Course in Miracles, which I actually read probably on the order of 25, 30 years ago. And now I'm tearing into it again with renewed vigor and enthusiasm, and it's tying together all the things that what triggered actually was Leonard's talk here just about 6 months ago in January, and this whole thing of forgiveness. Like, well, how does forgiveness have to? And it's the foundation of everything, basically, of the undoing of the illusion. So hopefully I can present something like. So anyway, here's kind of a quick review of these books. 7 Universal Laws that Apply to Everything, the Kabbalion, Disappearance of the Universe. And I just put a highly readable introduction to quantum forgiveness. It's in the library, yes. Plug the library. And maybe I better start using that. that better? Well, anyway. I'll try not to move so much because this microphone's a little flaky. There's so much great stuff in the library. I mean, if you could just lock yourself in there and do nothing but read and watch the videos for a few millennia, you'd have a great time, probably. And then, of course, the Course in Miracles, which I put here, the most concentrated spiritual wisdom I've ever read. And I think that's every time I pick it up, it's like reading between the lines. And the other comment here is the first time I picked it up, it's like, this almost the gag reflex of, I don't have anything against religion, but it comes across to the uninitiated as, when you first pick it up as a religious work, and it really isn't. It's actually a very profound spiritual thought system that's put across, and that is our natural estate. And so, anyway, that's so. If you have to leave early, you can just read this book. That's the quick summary. So, what we're going to start with is something that kind of goes beyond words, which is all-encompassing oneness. And a little quote from A Course in Miracles, which I've abbreviated ACIM here. What is all-encompassing can have no opposite. And this is who we are. This is what we really are. This is our natural state. And this is the profundity that we spend our whole lives occasionally having little epiphany moments with, and a lot of times sort of dancing around, and yet when we're in our relaxed meditative state in a peaceful frame of mind, we realize that's what we really are. We're really part and parcel of that all-encompassing oneness, and that's really what we're trying to remember and help each other get home to recall. So, being as we are in this 3D reality, we like to throw words at things. So here's a few words. Again, they're sort of feeble attempts to try to lasso this all-encompassing oneness in ways that our little minds, with the little m minds, can grok. So I put complete perfect oneness with the all-creator. We're truly a single, infinite, immortal being. We're changeless, timeless, spaceless, all-inclusive. We're transpersonal, transcendent. We're totally non-dualistic. We're beyond dreams and ineffable. And this little quote at the bottom, I'd heard this joke before, but actually until I listened to some of these Gary Renard tapes, I hadn't heard the sequel to the second part of it. So it goes, the Zen master to the hot dog vendor, make me one with everything. I was like that one. So the second part is coming up in a moment. So basically, there's really two thought systems, and that's what this profound spiritual document called A Course in Miracles. Again, you have to kind of get past the religious appearance, and as you read it, at least for me, it just feels like there's so much depth to that gives you the understanding that we're constantly sifting through one of two thought systems. There's either a belief in separation, which is probably the most popular hallucination around. And then there's thoughts that return our awareness to that all-encompassing oneness, the all-in-all, unity, whatever we want to describe it as. And at each moment, we have the opportunity to resonate with one or the other. And it's always a choice. So here's again a few words to throw at those two thought systems. Kindness and compassion compared to separation and fear, sanity contrasted with insanity, clarity or delusion. Another thing that's a really interesting concept that the Course talks about is in an abundant thought system or an all-inclusive thought system that transcends space and time, in a mental reality, you gain by sharing. Whereas there's, in the finite thought system, there's lack, and it's like if you give something, then you lose it. Because space and time, there's this notion of something leaves you when you give it. And there's a sense of loss. But you gain nothing truly by splitting apart. But you always gain by sharing. Another pair of opposites that relate to the two thought systems: harmlessness contrasted with attack, serenity and conflict, peace and anger, joy, boredom, truth and reality, falsity and illusion, and freedom contrasted with slavery and bondage. Again, you can pick all kinds of words, and The feeling, again, is the most important thing, because we have a sense of this inner barometer that automatically calibrates us to which thought system we're working with at any given moment. And if we feel at peace and in a sense of balance with ourselves, we know we're working with the kindness, the all-inclusive, omnipresent thought system. A few more words. Infinite omnipresent versus limited and local. Actually, I think the word non-local would also fit here on the omnipresent one, because our transpersonal self is really a non-local thought system. There's a lot of cool research going on with that right now. The non-local consciousness and transpersonal research of a lot of different kinds. Eternal and changeless compared to temporary and ephemeral. Life, which is truly eternal, versus the mortality of the transient states that we call our physical lives. Not that there's anything wrong with being physical. We're all here enjoying this, but if we get hung up on that, then it's like, well, these things come and go, and we can be passers-by, as it talks about in the Renard books. Love contrasted with hate, animosity, blame. Strength and defensiveness, betrayal. Purity, doubting, suspicion. Beauty or blindness and avoidance. Perfection or ignorance of law. Gratitude contrasted with resentment and grievances. And transcendence contrasted with mortality. So anyway, I'm going to pick one of these in particular, and we'll talk about it. But there's the bullets on the left there actually fit very nicely. That life, love, strength, purity, beauty, and perfection actually come from a book called The Life and Teachings of the Master of the Far East. Anybody read those? Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. And that third volume, there's one place where the being we call Jesus, a.k.a. Jeshua, probably goes by a lot of names, uses this invocation called the light, and those are the 6 words that are used. And I think it actually fits pretty nicely with the 6 symbols I'm going to talk about. And again, the symbols aren't the important thing, it's the feeling that's behind them. But symbols are fun. I like geometry and symbols, and you can use anything as a symbol. So just talking about that earlier this afternoon. Pick up anything. So here's a couple of symbols. Multiplication. You multiply your fun by sharing it. Whereas if you think you don't have enough to go around, then you have to divide it, right? So you can pick any symbols, and each one can be used by the thought system to bring a consciousness of unity, or it can be used to separate. So again, the hands-down most popular thought system in the universe is separation, or it would appear to be, although fortunately we are in a community where we are surrounding ourselves with people that seem to be generating that kind of awareness that says that oneness is really the way to go. We usually perceive ourselves as separate individuals, egos, personalities, bodies, stories, affect, and perception. So here's the second part of the Zen master story. So the Zen master overpays the hot dog vendor, and he asks for the change, and the hot dog vendor says, "Oh, well, change comes from within." So now if you ever hear one of Gary Renard's lectures, he'll probably use that, and so I will have spoiled his joke, but that's okay. You'll enjoy it the second time. So in terms of the illusions of space and time, what the Course talks about, and I'm going to refer to A Course in Miracles as the Course just because it's an easy shorthand, is that anything that with an object and a subject is dualistic, and they talk about the 2 dreams. There's this all-encompassing oneness, which is the greater reality that's beyond description. And then beyond, that's beyond all the thought systems, of course. But in the meantime, as we here in 3D, quote-unquote, reality are trying to figure out, there's 2 kinds of dreams. There's the happy dream and the nightmare. And the happy dreams are the ones I had on the left-hand column a couple slides back, and the nightmares are the ones that all the separation kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, consciousness requires a subject and an object. So we can still use consciousness as a way to get back to that awareness of the oneness or the happy dream instead of using it for the nightmare. And one of the things that they talk about in the Course is that the nightmare, if you see a little kid having a nightmare, you don't want to wake him up too fast, because it might scare him more than just gradually whispering in there, like, wake up slowly. So I think that's a good metaphor for our role in this world with each other is to help each other kind of whisper gently. It's like, we're all having this dream together. We can wake up from it. Yeah. So the space and time, I think, is really at the core of all the dreams. But we can wake up from that by understanding some of the insights actually from modern physics. And without getting into a lot of technical details, A, because I don't have the background to I'm not a physicist, but I'm interested in this kind of stuff. And B, it would take forever to try, and walls full of equations to try to figure all this out. But I think it really gets pretty simple. There's a couple of examples of quantum physics that show us and point in the direction that space-time is really a hologram, or to use the Star Trek metaphor, we're all projecting this holodeck together. And each of us projects a slightly different holodeck, but we're all doing it 24/7. There's a number called the Planck's constant that's 10 to the 44th times per second. And from what I understand, according to modern physics, we're literally tearing down the universe and rebuilding it from scratch that many times a second. So if we could see it at a stroboscopic level, we're actually pulsing this hologram pretty fast. So here's a couple of things that tie into understanding that illusion. One's called the Copenhagen interpretation, and those of you who know more physics than I do, feel free to chime in. My understanding of the Copenhagen interpretation is that electron can behave as a particle or a wave depending on the observer, and that when you observe the electron in an experiment that's been done over and over again, you do what quantum physicists call collapsing the wave function, and that coalesces the particles into matter. So it becomes, instead of a wave when it's not being watched, if you say, oh, let's look for particles, and sure enough, it stops being a wave and it starts becoming a particle. At least that's what I'm understanding. So in other words, consciousness influences the matter. So it's in my mind, another example of how our modern science is telling us what the mystics have been saying for millennia, that we're making it up as we go along. So if we're making it up, that's actually a big relief, because that means we can unmake or change what we're making up. Another example from modern physics is quantum entanglement, which basically says that a pair of electrons that come from the same pair, they will change their spin instantaneously, not speed of light or 7 times or 7 gazillion times the speed of light, but from what I understand, they will change their spin instantaneously to track one another. So if you change the spin of one, instantaneously it tracks another. So there's some kind of communication that's happening there that no matter how far apart they are, lets the two particles communicate. So to me, that the take-home lesson for that is that the notion of separation is bogus. So you can draw your own conclusions, but that's what it says for me, and maybe it seems like what a lot of physicists are kind of leading up to. So we'll talk a little bit about the nightmare, the soap opera, or whatever we want to call it, the belief in separation. Even our finite minds exist on dimensions that we're not usually alert to. So there are parts of us that when we tune into in reveries or epiphanies, we get little messages or voices from what we call our higher self or transpersonal self or whatever. And there's a lot of different ways that we can get those messages. Dreams, altered states of consciousness, what we call psychic phenomena, are just a few examples of the cracks in the hologram, so to speak, of the illusion, and really demonstrating to us how we're all interconnected. Another phrase that I heard years ago from a teacher I had was that there are 2 great illusions, that man and the universe. And that kind of fits into that whole idea. So the projections from our own unconscious mind exist on dimensions we're not usually alert to. So what Gary Renard talks about, and also the Course talks about, is in terms of the quantum forgiveness, which we'll get into in depth here in a little bit. There's actually aspects of our consciousness that are projecting on levels and dimensions that we don't generally consciously pay attention to. It's sort of like the iceberg metaphor. If our conscious mind was the little tip of the iceberg, the vast majority of it is that submerged part that we're aware of on some level or another, but not necessarily consciously. Okay. So in other words, without a consciousness of separation, the holodeck of the physical universe kind of winks out. The other day, as I was driving into Ashland this weekend, on the way to one of the workshop sessions this weekend, there was a little piece on NPR about Shakespeare, and they happened to be quoting from As You Like It. And I always liked this quote: "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances." And if we can see our lives as that, it's like, oh, I'm making this up. Then it frees us up to do what we're going to talk about next. There's a lot of great metaphors in the media. Did anybody see the original Star Trek series? There was an episode called The Amusement Park. They had one episode where Kirk and the crew land on this planet, and there was these little antennas that scan their thoughts and manufactured underneath the surface of the planet all the things they were thinking about almost instantaneously. And so that, biplane would go by, and then the knight in shining armor whisked the lady who was in the crew off on the horse, and then Kirk's old sparring partner from the academy materialized out of nowhere, and he got to duke it out with his old enemy or whatever. Anyways, but that's the kind of thing that where if you have the notion that we're in a virtual reality play, if you will, or the stage, then there's a lot of different great metaphors in our media, I think. The Truman Show, probably a lot of you have seen that movie. Yeah, I mean, it's just, the little bubble of our awareness, we think this is it. And maybe there's a, get to the other side of the stage and we'll see something else. Or then there's that classic woodcut where the guy is peering through the cosmos and sees all the gears. Same kind of thing. So this isn't a new concept. The Eastern religions, philosophies have been telling us, Maya and illusion have been, what's getting in the way of our awakening for a long time. The Matrix series, if you kind of ditch all the violence and just enjoy the concept. So anyway, a lot of other films that go into that. So scarcity, loneliness, guilt, fear, pain, all of that require the premise of separation. So the best way to keep the illusion intact is to deny our complicity in making it up and then blame what appears to be outside of ourselves. So our relationship with other people and other things and understanding that is sort of the fast track to undoing the illusion. And that's what I've been re-inspired by Gary Renard's writing and his audio material to reinvigorate that Course in Miracles understanding, because it really is. I mean, if we can relate to each other and let go of the grievances, I mean, we got Mach 9 ticket here. And I picked a quote from last week that I actually was taking notes while I was in the back room here listening to Fred give his wonderful talk. And it, kind of tying into the things you see on the wall here. They can only attack you if you attack them. So it kind of fits in perfectly. So the prodigal return to our true nature is unlimited and peaceful is really just waking up from the dreams or nightmares of comparison, isolation, fear, and temporary situations. This quote on the bottom, I think I saw this on a giant eraser once, a big rubber eraser. I thought I was mistaken, but I was wrong. I think it kind of fits actually pretty nicely. If in truth we are one with all knowingness, and that's our natural state, then we're just waking up from a state of unknowing to the state of perfect knowingness, perfect peace, perfect love, perfect fill in the blanks, right? So anyway, I think that actually that thing that was written on that giant eraser probably fits. Okay. So basically there's two kinds of forgiveness that in Gary Renard's work he talks about. He talks about the Newtonian forgiveness, which is the old-fashioned, somebody out there to forgive, and then the quantum variety. So the Newtonian forgiveness, if you want to call it that, requires separate objects. It requires a they. They did something to us or didn't do something to us, which really doesn't really address the root cause, because as long as there's an object and a subject, we have the duality of consciousness creating, I've got a back door, I've got a secret way out of actually for doing the forgiveness, because I can drawing on some Masonic jargon, secret evasion, mental reservation, and all that kind of stuff. We can sashay around the actual forgiveness and keep hidden away in some little other part of our unconscious, locked away, this little secret hatred or resentment or bitterness or whatever it happens to be. But the problem is that the only person that's suffering from that is us if we do that. So the quantum forgiveness requires a couple of things. One is there's nobody outside and nothing outside us to forgive. And if modern physics is correct and space-time really is bogus, fraud, fiat, made up, then in truth, there really is nothing to forgive. And this is actually a pretty advanced metaphysical principle, really, because once we do that, we're basically almost home. And that's what a lot of the mystics have been telling us for millennia. That this is we're sort of in the last phases if we really grok that. And I think that's why Leonard's triggering this thing of forgiveness earlier this year. It's like, what is it about this forgiveness thing? Because it suddenly started clicking for me that if you get rid of space-time, then I'm talking to myself right now. So that's true 24/7, no matter where I go on the planet, and I suspect it's probably true for you too, you. And that means that there's nobody outside. And the other part of it is there's nothing to forgive. Okay, and that's probably maybe a little bit more of a stretch, because we normally think of the things that make up our life and our story and our drama as this is, we think, oh, this is who I am. Well, what if who we really are, what we truly are, is one with the infinite? And all these, even if you don't believe in reincarnation, even these little individual lifetimes are ephemeral wisps of something that really isn't there. If we can embrace the sense of the surreal a little bit and look at our everyday waking lives as being just a little bit more surreal, or maybe like Shakespeare was saying, all the world's a stage. And if we really grok that on not just an intellectual level, but a full chakra, emotional, visceral, the whole thing, if we really get that feeling that we're making this stuff up, we pull a plug on it and, it goes away kind of thing. But we're here to learn from it. So the idea is the fast track again. If we are upset with somebody else, then where perception is not only distorted, but it's keeping us stuck in the guck, or like, the tar baby. Anyone remember that story? The more you swing at it, the more you get stuck kind of thing. So the thought system that the forgiveness comes from or is based on is crucial. So if we think in terms of separation, that it's somebody out there to forgive and there's something that they did, that's ephemeral, that has a beginning and an end, time-based, then, we're not getting the quantum forgiveness thing. So hopefully, that is something that you already have a resonance with, which I suspect you probably do, or you wouldn't be here. So that's the real release, is letting go and understanding that nothing in space-time actually happened, which frees the mind from the foundation for blame, shame, guilt, projection, and all sorts of gosh-awful abuse. And the other thing to be alert to, kind of like we were talking about earlier, of the sneakiness of the egoic mind, is the part of us that really is attached to the story doesn't like being deprived of its scapegoats. So if suddenly you say, well, there's nobody out there that needs forgiving and nothing that needs to forgive, then it suddenly kind of puts the onus like, uh-oh, the mirror is shining pretty brightly. It's like, that means that it's up to me to let go of this stuff, which is true. I mean, we got to do it. It's up to us to do it. But that's a good thing, because the locus of control, if you want to use that jargon, of the things we actually can do something about is here. I mean, I am, well, not powerless, but it's kind of ineffective to try to change other people's lives. But fortunately, we can make a difference on our own lives. So a few comments there. Forgiveness directly benefits the forgiver. It might benefit the forgivee, but that's none of your business. I mean, ultimately, if you really think about it, it's totally up to them. It's like if it happens to be beneficial, which it usually does because of the resonance effect, that's great. but that's not where you're coming from. One of the quotes that I read, I was picking up the course this morning, and if I can remember how it went, it was something like, the only way to achieve immediate results is to have infinite patience. And it's like, bingo! That kind of registered for me. Because as soon as you're attached to the outcome, you're dealing with effect, and you're just, a cog in the Newtonian wheel of the effect machine. Whereas if you jump into that quantum realm where you participate and recognize that your true existence is at the level of cause, then voila, then you're dealing with that infinite patience again, because you realize, oh, this too shall pass. And it kind of slides on by. So you don't have to give up anything, and that's one thing that I like about Gary's work. He says, I like money, I like sex, I like things, I like stuff. I like being in the material world and going places and watching movies and having fun. And he says you don't have to give up anything, just the attachments or anxieties to them. And if we just sort of like this weekend we're talking about Aikido and how the principle of Aikido is just allowing it to flow through and not really getting attached to it. Another metaphor that I liked also from the Baird Spalding books was in the Life and Teachings of the Master of the Far East. They talk about how if you're learning something and you use steps, this thing keeps falling down. There, that's better. If you're learning something and you climb up a series of steps, it's kind of a hindrance to carry the staircase on your back with you. It's probably better to leave it for the next person to use, kind of thing. So anyway. So, when someone is expressing unconditional acceptance, the appropriate response, according to the Course, is unconditional acceptance. That one's pretty easy. Now, the corollary to that is when someone is not expressing unconditional acceptance, the appropriate response is unconditional acceptance. That makes it real simple because you don't have to guess which one to use. It's sort of a universal thing. And I like universal things. That's why I think that's why I got into math and geometry, because those are things that don't change a lot. And hopefully if you find something that never changes, then you don't ever have to learn it. So even when it came down to learning people's birthdays, I felt like, I don't want to know how old you are, what year were you born? Then I don't have to memorize that. It doesn't change all the time. So and I'm not even into birthdays, but I did figure that was a good mnemonic, right? So again, this is what the Course says. Everything is either an expression of love or a calling for it. We're either, at any moment, we're expressing love, or we're expressing, help, I need a boost here with a little of that love stuff, and we're actually asking the universe for that response. So the egoic or separate mind is only temporary, so we can banish its darkness with the light of quantum forgiveness. It also relates to transpersonal kindness, transcendent compassion, non-resistance, and all the stuff that results from that knowingness. So the practical wisdom of quantum forgiveness is reduce stress, which can improve your conditions in the illusion of your body, like lower blood pressure, so many different things. Leonard here is a great example of having done some of the research that shows how the coiling of the DNA can be changed by sending love. So many different things. I mean, there's the experiments done with the heart link and so forth, where you get someone tuned into a deep, peaceful state, and a tree 30, 40, 50 feet away suddenly starts resonating with the same rhythms. Look at it on the scope, and there it is. So many different things that happen when we tune into that feeling of everything's interconnected, everything's interwoven, and we're all part of that fabric, and we're the weaver of the fabric, a weaver of the dream, and we can make the dream a happy dream rather than a nightmare. So, I think we just talked about this. The non-attachment to outcomes that accompanies quantum forgiveness is really actually responsible for optimizing the outcomes, because when we're attached to the outcomes, we miss the things that we can be doing. It kind of blinds us to the effectiveness that we can have in the realm of illusion. So the real freedom actually lies in cause. And if you've ever noticed that when you're having a fun time, like I am right now, you're not really concerned about what's the outcome going to be. It's like if you're in a state of serenity or peace, you really don't care, what the result is. It's like you're just in that cause. You've probably all experienced that in a lot of different ways, and those little epiphany moments that come when you realize, oh, I wasn't thinking about trying to achieve anything. It's sort of akin to Eastern thought, but anyway. So quantum forgiveness is not only justified, there's no actual cause for upset. Living in cause rather than effect is where the real freedom lies. And it does take a lot of practice. Here's a quote from, I think this is actually from What the Bleep. There's no out there. I like that one a lot. Okay. So, seen from a quantum forgiveness perspective, every moment can be an opportunity for practice. And there's an acronym that I'm going to borrow from Gary Renard's books. He came up with this little phrase, he and his two teachers came up with this little acronym called JFO, which means that every moment is just another forgiveness opportunity. And actually earlier today I made some little transparencies and they're kind of smeared, but if you want, I can email you the file and you can print them out. The idea being, if we could have every moment that we were tempted to be upset with ourselves or someone else or whatever, fill in the blank. I was so amused when I walked in this evening and saw all the stuff on the wall. And if you look around and look at some of these things and all the things that people get upset about, and obviously they're things that are within the realm and the context of this world, things that we need to be responsive to and do what we can to turn around the insanity, right? And yet, at the same time, if we tune into the transpersonal part of ourselves that says, yes, and there's a part of me, a more non-local perhaps, a more all-expansive part of me that recognizes that while I'm doing what I can do, the best way to do that is to see myself as an infinite being and see everyone else participating as an infinite being, including the ones that we may have had grievances about. So this is a neat little exercise, I think, and really a useful tool. So if whoever's, is the camera, I've got some images in the next few slides that I pulled off the web and I don't have any permission to air, so I don't want them videotaped. So if you could move the camera in such a way that, you got it, Robert? Thank you. Okay, good. So the next few slides, I don't want on tape because, again, I don't have permission to air, but I think you'll find them kind of an interesting exercise. Oh, and then a little quote at the bottom here. It's always something. If you remember Gilda Radner on Saturday Night Live, that's kind of again, the egoic mind is always trying to find some excuse to be upset about something, right? So anything that raises your hackles or even if it's just the most minor little irritation is fair game for practicing this quantum forgiveness on. So if you imagine this little JFO acronym popping into your mind whenever you see something that annoys you or could be a serious frustration. So here's some examples. Let's say there's some, I put at the bottom here, kind of the take-home part. Substitute your favorite corporate or work, business, livelihood, reality figures or symbols here. And it could be anything, just anything that you feel the least or major or minor irritations about could be fair game. So we could just, imagine a little holographic overlay that says, this is just another forgiveness opportunity. Whenever we see that. So again, these images on the wall were like perfect synchronicity here. Because there's so many examples, just switching on the TV or the radio or picking up a newspaper. And it's so easy to get caught up in that. And the instant we do the blame game, we're losing sight of what effective change we can actually affect, which is kind of interesting. Again, it's getting back to that non-attachment to the outcomes. So here's another one. Let's say you might have a favorite religious or authority figure here. Just another forgiveness opportunity. Pick your favorites, it doesn't really matter. And that's the beauty of it. It's non-discriminating. Anything is fair game for quantum forgiveness. Okay. How about some political figures? Hey! Just another forgiveness opportunity, right? Doesn't matter who it is. Okay, how about the environment? You know, anybody care about making sure our planet, goes on for a few more years? Sure. Anybody know people who have been enviro-Nazis? My wife will attest to that. I still turn off far too many lights around the house, as far as she's concerned. But I'm mellowing out a little bit as time goes on. Things like that. So anyways, substitute your favorite world problem images here and imagine, oh, that's just another forgiveness opportunity. And then we truly can be effective. If you're not attached to it in a way that pulls out your emotional energy and sucks it into an endless black hole pit of uselessness, then we really can actually make effective change. Okay. Here's our house when it was being built a couple years ago. Okay. Anybody have household issues? Pick your favorite, home, neighborhood, community, whatever issues go. How about favorite technology images? Anybody have problems with gadgets and computers, or how about a toilet? Funny I picked that one because I was actually playing plumber here about half an hour ago, just because I wanted people to be able to flush the toilet if they needed to use that during the break, and doing a little wiring. And it was like, as each one arose, I was like, okay, just another forgiveness opportunity. And sure enough, by not getting stressed out about it unduly, they went away, and that's what they tend to do. This too shall pass. So I mean, and even the horrific things that we think of. A couple of weeks ago we had a wonderful presentation on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the forgiveness that needs to be done around that whole issue, and finding sustainable energy, and there's solutions out there. And like Mother Teresa said, if there's an anti-war rally, I won't be there. But if you have a pro-peace rally, that's where I'll be. So I think that's, again, it's that perspective. So it's just another forgiveness opportunity. And I just grabbed some family pictures at random off the web. So, substitute your favorite family members, in-laws, or outlaws. It doesn't matter. Just another forgiveness opportunity. And how about yourself? I just pick one. Your own image of yourself. Here's what I think I've done. Here's what I think my story is. Can we let go of all that stuff? Can we realize, wait a minute, this is just an ephemeral thing, and I can forget about if somebody, or something outside myself, or myself, if I feel like I'm upset with myself for not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or stacking all the things that I think I should be achieving. They're all just another forgiveness opportunity. Okay. So symbols can be used as training wheels to remember that we're part of this all-encompassing oneness. And anything can be used as a tool, a metaphor, a mnemonic, to support either thought system, either the thought system of the happy dream or the nightmare, either the thought system of oneness or the thought system of separation. So there's really an infinite number of symbols that we can use to support whichever thought system we're aligned with. The other day I was out for a walk, and I was thinking, a couple days ago, and I was thinking, running through some of the things I thought I might share, and I found this little pin on the ground. I thought, well, how could I use that? Well, okay, if I look at the cross-section of it, it's made out of a cylinder, and the cross-section of a cylinder is a circle. Well, a circle is a symbol for the infinite perfection, equanimity. Kind of sort of sashaying into the geometry here a little bit. So a circle is nothing more than a two-dimensional sphere, if you will, or a slice through a sphere. And if a hypersphere is something that you can relate to, that maybe there's spheres within spheres on other dimensions of our awareness and consciousness, that if you expand it to infinity, then we're all an infinite sphere. So, I mean, you can look at anything. I mean, and then I was looking at this, it's like, oh, well, here's all these other things. I'll bring this up again in a few moments when we talk about the other natural laws. And then I grabbed another one here. This is a little more contrived. This is a dodecahedrally shaped iron pyrite crystal. And this has significance for me because it ties into all kinds of sacred geometry and fun stuff like that. But you can use any symbol you want, anything that works for you, and anything at all can be used as a trigger to bring that awareness that there's nothing to forgive. And if we let go of all that stuff, we have the thought system there always, ever present to remind us that we're supported, we're comforted, we're loved, we are part of the infinite fabric of all that is, and that's what we're here for. So shapes, numbers, words, images, and if you have a favorite number, if you have a dream that triggers a remembrance, says, oh, I'm not separate from all that is. You might have a favorite genre or types of music that when you are listening to it just totally brings you into that state of serenity and peace. A smell, it could be anything. And even the things that we don't want to remind us to, with the right perspective, the thought system of oneness can take anything and turn it into a symbol that can remind us, even if it's saying, oh, this is the opposite of the state I want to be in. So if the world inside us is inside us and harmless, then why would we need to be on any sort of crusade? Sort of a rhetorical question there. We can instead use any situation as a symbolic, gentle reminder to release our misperceptions and return to our innate peace. So the true importance of any symbol is what it represents. There's a radio show called The Visionary Activist on a Berkeley, California radio station called KPFA, and you can listen to it on the web on Thursday afternoons at 2 o'clock. I've listened to it off and on for years when it's convenient. And the host, Caroline Casey, has a number of fun little metaphors, and one of them she talks about is a lot of religious and philosophical systems get bogged down in, the finger rather than where it's pointing to, metaphorically. It's like you get hung up in the trappings of the symbol rather than what was the symbol supposed to represent. And anybody see the movie The Life of Brian?
Oh,
yeah. I loved it. Of course, there's parts of it that are a little ridiculous, but the other parts, there's one where he inadvertently becomes the subject of a throng of followers, and he takes off one of his shoes, and only because he lost one of his shoes, and and so the people following him think, oh, this is a sign from this inspired being, and so we must take off our shoe and follow the example, kind of thing. It's like, it's so ludicrous, but I mean, what a great metaphor for looking at the outward manifestation and paying homage and worshiping that rather than what is this supposed to represent here? Come on now, let's get to the deeper meaning going on. So anyway, and then there's one scene where he's on this balcony and he opens the shutters and he's stark naked because he didn't realize anybody was out there, and then he comes back a few moments later because the throng isn't going away, and he says, they all ask him, you remember that, where he says, what shall we do, Master? And go think for yourselves. It's just a great film. I just thought it had some fun metaphors there. So again, to me, if you're going to use a symbol, why not pick one that doesn't change around a lot? I like the universal symbols. So ones that don't rely on time, space, and cultural specifics as much as possible. And again, once you get into the realms of the dream, it's pretty hard to get away from that. The only thing that truly doesn't change is that all-encompassing oneness that's beyond words. And yet, having said that, there's plenty of symbols like the circle, like the Vesica Pisces. We'll talk about some of these in a moment. Things that embody principles of interconnectedness, 100% benevolence. And they lead toward integration, consistency, and prepare us for the consciousness of transcendence, or actually take us there, in moments of epiphanies or surrender to that oneness that we have. So why don't we take a little break, and then we'll talk about the 7 Hermetic Laws and go into a great deal of detail about how there are these 7 Hermetic Laws that relate to how we can understand the dream and how we can wake up from it. And there's some geometric symbols that I'll go over. And again, It's not the finger, it's not the shoe. These symbols are placeholders. Remember, placeholders. Just like we're remembering that this experience we have is a placeholder for our real life, and yet there's no reason not to enjoy it, no reason not to savor the depth of what this world has to offer. So anyway, why don't we take about a 5-10 minute break, and we'll go into the Hermetic stuff, aka natural laws, universal laws. Thank you. And I also forgot to mention I have a few books and cards in the back there, and I also have a sign-up sheet. I have a monthly email bulletin, and I'm always happy to send out things that relate to sacred geometry and consciousness and fun stuff, and share that on a monthly basis. So if I put this down, can you still hear me? We've got the level on the lapel mic? Level there? Oh, good. Okay. So what I want to talk about for the second half is the Hermetic Laws that this book called The Kabbalion talks about. And to tie it together, I think what first attracted me to this is the universality of these laws. The fact that no matter who you are, where you are, what planet you're on, there's principles that apply regardless. And these can be tools for helping us understanding the dream and how to wake up from it, or as Ed pointed out during the break, wake up in the dream as well. That's which is, the lucidity is such a crucial part of it, and I think that goes hand in hand with understanding that we're part of that all-encompassing oneness. That lucidity and being present is a crucial part of that whole awareness. So, as we mentioned earlier, you could pick anything. You could pick, an acorn off the ground, a metal clip, anything that runs across your awareness can be used as a tool to reinforce either thought system. I think I have a lot of fun with geometric symbols, and again, it could be a song, a poem, a fragrance, a word, a number, anything. But we're going to focus the rest of the evening on one specific arena of geometric symbols, and they're just hand-picked to relate to these 7 Hermetic laws, and I'll relate to the qualities that these apply. So what you see in this diagram here is a list of the 7 Hermetic laws, and from the center up and then out and around counterclockwise, the center image I have is a depiction of the law of mentalism. The idea being that the circle represents the infinite mind. And I'll just briefly describe the symbols and then talk about them as I talk about the 7 laws. The next one above that is a depiction of the Vesica Piscis, which is essentially 2 circles that have the same size that overlap each other. And once you depart from the unity into duality, you can still use duality as a reminder to get back to unity. So the Vesica Piscis, or the almond shape, is a symbol that metaphorically has to do with communion or communication. And even in our physical bodies, the eye, the mouth, the stomata of plants has that shape, the interface. How we see eye to eye, or in the metaphor of 2 circles that have overlapped such that the circumference of one touches the center of the other, metaphorically, when we touch each other's hearts, we're basically embodying that, and that's why in a lot of medieval art, Jesus was depicted as inside of Vesica Piscis for that very reason, to embody the concept that the Christ consciousness, or whatever label we want to call it, the unity consciousness, the oneness awareness, sees through the duality to find the unity, the place where there's that overlap. The third principle, so the correspondence then again is the second principle that ties in with that particular shape. The third law, the law of vibration, has to do with any time we experience anything with our senses, or even in our minds, there's a vibratory rate associated with it, or a series of vibratory rates. So we're really walking symphonies, if you will, on every sensory input we can think of. So if we understand the nature of the vibration that we're entertaining at any given moment, which we can detect through the principle of feeling, if it feels good, that means we're probably in harmony with thought system that's saying, we're not finite. So the vibratory energy is symbolized in this, I guess it'd be the 10 o'clock position here in the wheel of vibrations emanating out from the source. And again, you could pick any symbol, but this is just one that I've chosen as a placeholder for that concept or that principle. Moving down counterclockwise, underneath that, you have a 12-pointed star that shows pairs of opposites. So you have, in this particular example, 6 pairs of opposites. And the law of polarity says that to reconcile opposites, you merely need to bring them together to the center. And this would tie into the alchemical principle of earth, air, fire, and water transmuting into the gold of eternal awareness. It also would relate to the fact that when we see beyond duality, we're transcending. So a triangle is another good metaphor. So again, none of these symbols is hard and fast. This is the symbol, you know. They're all placeholders. But I think each one can be used as a tool to remember that we're all trying to help each other return to that state of oneness. And whenever we go beyond the polarized thinking, and just look at the photographs on the walls here. I mean, talk about polarized thinking. You know, the we-they paradigm is everywhere we turn in our culture. And yet, there's that knowingness that says, there's a better way. There's another way of looking at this. There's another thought system, another paradigm that can transcend the duality and reconcile the polarities. The fifth one at the bottom is the principle of rhythm, which I've got depicted as a series of actually pentagons spiraling inward to the center. And the spiral is a great symbol because the spiral represents so many different elements and aspects of nature, the ebb and flow of the spiraling and meandering of galaxies and rivers and the branching and so many different ways that spirals occur in our nature. Even our hearing relates to the cochlea in the ear, the spiral galaxies, the fern spirals that follow a Fibonacci pattern. And I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've got on my website and countless other places that talk about how this principle of interconnectedness is embodied not only in the spiral, but I chose the pentagon for a particular reason because a 5-pointed star has the proportions of what's known as the golden ratio, and probably a lot of you are familiar with that ties into the, a quick demonstration. Navel to the ground, navel to the top of the head, and is given.
Let's try it this way. That's better. Well, I'm doing this anyway. If you stand outstretched, the other arm this way, the other arm that way, if you have to imagine now. The 5 extremities represent a 5-pointed star. So we have that embodied literally in our bodies, that proportion. And not only in the macroscopic realm, but also in the microscopic realm. The DNA, the cross-section of the DNA is actually a decagon or 2 pentagons, and every ratchet of the DNA spirals 34 angstroms to the 21 angstrom diameter. So you've got Fibonacci numbers there, which relate to the golden ratio, and approximate that same proportion again, which is the proportion that has to do with interconnectedness because it's the proportion of context itself. The golden ratio is a number which, when you add 1 to it, is the same number squared. So metaphorically, if you're taking this principle of interconnectedness and integrating unity within it, by adding 1, so to speak, then you're raising that understanding to another dimension or another level, another power. That's kind of how I like to look at it anyway. So there's my little mathematical equation for the evening about the golden ratio. So I'm going to turn this back on.
That's embodied in that golden ratio pentagonal spiral pattern that relates to rhythm and how the flow of nature embodies that principle everywhere you turn. And it's allowing us to tune into the principle of flow. When we're not attached to the results, when we kind of go with the flow and follow that inner knowingness, things tend to flow pretty nicely, and there's this sort of rhythm to our lives that we can harmonize with. The 6th principle of cause and effect, if you imagine this is sort of an aerial view of a tree with all the branches, or a fractal pattern. A lot of you are probably familiar with fractals, where you have a pattern that no matter how far you zoom in, the image looks the same, zoomed in and zoom out. So a fractal pattern is nothing more than an example, again, of this metaphorical interconnectedness, because it's the same quality, the same essence, regardless of the external manifestation, if that makes sense. So in terms of the law of cause and effect, every single thing that we think of, every idea that we have branches out in this fractal, or this infinite tree of possibilities, parallel realities or universes, if you will, and everything we do affects everything else. So there's so many different levels of causality that we participate in every moment. And again, the important thing is to remember, it's like, oh, we're not effect, we're cause. The hologram is the effect. That's the Newtonian mechanical thing that we're a gazillion times a second breathing life into and making it up as we go along. But the eternal changeless reality of what we are is the truth that is the cause of what we are. And then the last of the 7 is in the 2 o'clock position. This pattern actually is symbolized by the pairs of circles within pairs of circles within pairs of circles. So again, another fractal pattern. This actually showed up in England as a crop circle called the Liddington Crop Circle Formation. I put this in my book, which is in the back there, and I thought, well, that's kind of a neat pattern. And then a few years later, it's like, oh, they made a crop circle out of this. I don't know if it was one of the hoaxes or not, but because some of them are hoaxed, but I thought that was kind of neat. And what this embodies is the idea that the yin and yang has levels of recursion or nesting that we have, for example, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on and so on. You can look at that on that level. You can also say every thought and feeling together creates a result that then creates, branching out, into infinity. So all these principles really are interwoven. You really can't separate one from the other, just as we can't separate ourselves from each other in truth. So as long as we're dealing with duality, everything tends to get a little bit woven together, because that's how it really is. So anyway, there's a quick overview and some of the symbols that relate to it. So I'm going to talk about some of the principles behind the laws. So I think of the Hermetic Laws as sort of a metaphysical grand unified theory that physicists are searching for a grand unified field theory, or a theory of everything. But perhaps the Hermetic Laws of truth that are in the Kabbalion and handed down for millennia, supposedly from Hermes Trismegistus in ancient Egypt, who was evidently the architect of the Great Pyramid, so it was said. These could actually be principles that have existed long before that time and will exist long after. And I haven't found any counterexamples yet. If you can think of any, I'd love to know. But it seems like everything that you can think of, that set of 7 principles is embodied in. So the first one, the law of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. All truths are but half-truths. Again, that fractal notion that as we become more lucid and expand our awareness, we see greater dimensions and greater depths to the understanding. Different aspects of the law of mentalism: awareness, consciousness, oneness, perfection, creation. Expectation is huge. Identification, infinity, eternity. So we're aware of our body, but we're more than our body. We're aware of our mind, so we're more than our mind. If consciousness is the big unanswered question in the universe, in physics, maybe it's also the big unanswered question in life. There's a friend of mine named Peter Russell, that some of you might know of, that has done a lot of work with consciousness, and he keeps coming back to this thing of, well, physics is doing some interesting stuff, but they're at a loss as to try to figure out where to put consciousness, because then as soon as you try to figure out where's the primal foundation of everything, consciousness doesn't fit in if you're coming from a materialist perspective. If you're trying to use the holodeck as your foundation, which is kind of shaky, then consciousness is like, this got to go, because it doesn't fit. But if you work with consciousness as the foundation, then it all sort of works out. And again, consciousness in the context of object-subject, even that is a dualistic illusion, that subject to being relative to the all-encompassing oneness that transcends all that. So, at least as I understand it. So, your mileage may vary. So, our consciousness transcends time, space, dimension, and embraces eternity, infinity, and the ineffable void. And if you imagine a circle or a sphere going out to infinity, if that perfect shape expands to infinity, then if that's our consciousness, then there's no other. Like the Don Miguel Ruiz quote, "Don't make assumptions." and every time we assume that this is real, we're assuming that, oh, this is all there is. This is the limit of my Truman Show. We think that's it. Awareness and consciousness. The symbol for the void might be the point. It occupies no space, yet exists in space. The singularity, as folks like Nassim Haramein like to say. The point in math is shown as a dot, yet a dot has finite size, whereas the point is infinitely small. The point of our existence is infinite. Even our words have great symbolism if we look at it that way. Our minds will forever expand to embrace ever-widening circles and spheres of new dimensions of understanding. And that's where the lucidity comes in, as Ed was saying. So let's say the physical world is the observed and the mental activity is the process of observing. Then who or what is the observer? And again, this is where physicists drives them nuts. At least the Newtonian physicists. The quantum ones are embracing this now, and they're saying, yeah, let's work with consciousness and dial that in as foundational. Okay, the I and the thou disappears, basically. The metaphor of the droplet returning to the ocean, that came to me a couple of weekends ago in a workshop in Grass Valley, actually, and it was like, oh yeah, that's such a great metaphor, because we really are like little infinitesimal, seemingly, dots, and yet if we're infinite, then we're both infinite and infinitesimal. Infinite in the sense of our true estate is one with the Creator, however you want to describe that, ineffableness, and yet our ephemeral lives are the infinitesimal. So that kind of sometimes helps to put the drudgeries and the day-to-day stuff in perspective, doesn't it? I hope it does for you. It does for me. So the point, which exists everywhere, is just one point if space and time are collapsed. So there's only one point. Control the mind and you control the body, says the quote. The sphere of any number of dimensions expanded to infinity encloses an infinite oneness. We're neither and both. So we're all perfect beyond words, beyond symbols. We're changeless essence. We're beyond even anything the mind can envision. Back to that ineffable void. The Tao, the singularity, all these other names that transcend mind. And the perfection of it is that we're constantly creating using mind, or making it up, I should say. Actually, the way the Course phrases it, they use creation for that which is eternal, and making is for stuff that's fleeting and ephemeral. And I think that's kind of a neat language. So at the bottom, there's a quote from the workbook in the Course that says, "I have given everything I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place." Fill in the blanks. All the meaning that it has for me. So we're creating. Using the term loosely, or making up the meaning that everything in our lives has for us. We're kind of like in Genesis, we're naming the things. We're saying, oh, this is this. Well, so sure enough, it means that for you, because that's what you made it, Okay. Intention and attention direct the mind factory, kind of like that Star Trek episode of the little antennas scooping up our thoughts and fabricating the stuff of our lives. Our mental model greatly influences outcomes. That's from the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. Expectation is another huge aspect of mentalism. The self-fulfilling prophecy principle is a wonderful key of revealing the insights of how powerful expectation is. One example of that comes to mind is years ago I was taking some psychology classes from Charlie Tart at UC Davis, and he was the fellow who coined altered states of consciousness. And one of the things he was talking about that I thought was kind of cool is he drew a curved line on the chalkboard. And he says, well, how do we know that's a straight line? He says, well, you can take this ruler, and he had this specially made curved ruler that just matched the curved line. He says, I can take this ruler and show you and prove to you that this is a straight line. And I thought, well, what a great example, you know. It's like, this is, you know, it's all what we make it up to be. So the self-fulfilling prophecy has a lot to do with the feeling. And there's a wonderful book called Feeling is a Secret by Neville that talks about this principle that some of you may have read. And again, the feeling is really where we put the emotional energy and the oomph into it. And in the world of manifestation, that's what does it. You know, that's what that video, the secret really is all about, is the feeling. And the secret of the secret, of course, is not being attached to the outcomes. Because if you're dealing with trying to make the material world be, you know, the thing, then you've got the cart before the horse instead of the heart before the course, right? I like that one. So if you feel that your desires have been fulfilled or living in the realm of cause, then the law of mentalism fulfills that expectation. And then gratitude is a huge part of it. You know, that's the heart there. Because you can't feel gratitude, really, unless you are no longer attached to the outcome. Because you're already in the experience of the desired result when you feel gratitude. Okay. Another quote from a book by Eldon Taylor. We may not be in charge of certain stimuli in our external environment, but we definitely are in charge of our internal environment. Another quote from Dan Millman. When the student is really ready, the teacher appears everywhere. Again, you know, anything can be used as a symbol when used by the thought system of what the Course calls the Holy Spirit, you know, if you don't mind the religious connotation, or just the holistic awareness or the unifying consciousness that brings separation to non-existence. What we identify with our self-concept becomes the light that we project onto the screen of our world. Again, that Truman Show, you know. Our self-image held in mind assembles the atoms of our physical universe. Each of us has a different mental map, and so we have a little bit different mental universe, or material universe as it manifests. So the take-home lesson is love your true, unlimited, transpersonal self. Home free. And infinity and eternity, again, is the parameters of the truth of what we are. We're eternal, infinite beings. And when we release attachment to any particular interpretation, then that frees us to choose other realities in the realm of possibilities. So if we really are fabricating this hologram 10 to the 44th times per second, that means we've got enormous choices. If someone says, well, I haven't had time to change, you can remind them that, you know, if you're not being flippant, that 10 to the 44th times in the last second, they could have chosen a different path. But that's pretty neat. I mean, that really means that we have enormous opportunities to shift things around. I like this quote. We do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. That's from the Talmud. Yeah. So the second law is the law of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. I'll just read the quote from the Kabbalion. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enables man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in his observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Okay. So we have some aspects of law of correspondence: synchronicity, self-reference, transmutation, communication, communion, influence, overtones, and attunement. Synchronicity is basically another way of saying that patterns that exist in dimensions of realities we don't generally recognize can have profound and meaningful relationships. We're not always aware of the mechanisms, but on some deeper level, we may know that everything corresponds, and we have that intuitive sense of, oh yeah. How about incidents corresponding as a coincidence? Lucid dreams, perfect example. Intuitive flashes. When our muse, when you're writing a book or composing music or whatever, and suddenly it just starts flowing through you, just rapid fire. Synchronicity. We're tapping into a more expanded conception of who we are, and all the clairs and the psychos, the psychometry, psychokinesis, all the phenomena, if you will, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, all that kind of stuff. Just resonating on different levels of different aspects of who we are. So fractals are examples of self-referential patterns that correspond. Each small portion is connected to and resembles the larger whole. In Oriental medicine, you have the acupuncture points on the ear, the hand, the foot, all different, corresponding to the entire body. A lady named Beverly Rubik, who gave a talk for our New Frontiers group in California, and I know is a friend of Leonard, was showing this device where you literally can hook up your 10 fingers on it, and what evolved out of the Kirlian photography technology, and you take the flares that happen on the fingertips and use the Chinese acupuncture system to literally show those same flares on the entire body in almost real time, and to get a map of the whole energy structure. It's kind of cool. Again, there's that correspondence, as above, so below. The small part corresponds to the large part, and so forth. Self-reference, families, communities, roots, branches, coastlines, all the different networks that we can think of have this example of self-reference and correspondence. So if you use a higher law, if you want to use that phrase, or more accurately, a more inclusive law, we're able to transcend and transmute less inclusive laws. And it's kind of like the jurisdiction thing. Invoking a higher jurisdiction here. I remember when I was taking a physics class at college, they talked about this thing called a Lorentz transformation, which basically says that Newtonian physics is true, it just operates in a limited subset of this larger reality. And they showed how you could take, I'll just throw a little bit of math at you, the v squared over c squared term, and you throw that into the equation under a square root somewhere, if I remember correctly, and suddenly Newtonian is just a limiting subset where the velocity is close to zero relative to the speed of light. But when you get up close to the speed of light, then voila, then suddenly you've got this whole new realm. So this is, to me, is a perfect example of how you can have laws within laws within laws, and as we expand our understanding, they correspond, and we can use, thank you, the higher laws to understand. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Actually, these do get kind of a little shorter, and then we'll hopefully have a few minutes for Q&A. Kinship with life. I'm going to do the Cliff Notes version here. The vesicle shape, again, metaphor for communication. Everything we think, feel, or do, or say exerts an influence on everything else. That's quite a responsibility, but it's also a lot of fun if we look at it that way. Archetypes have their counterparts in every octave, plane, or sphere. You move to a new town and you see people that remind you of people you used to know, things like that. I mean, just all kinds of examples like that. The quote at the bottom, Niels Bohr, no, you're not thinking, you're just being logical. Another quote at the bottom, everything is a message, everything is a symbol, everything is a dream. There's a musical group called Trent Zen Dance that has that in one of their lyrics. So it all depends on what we attune to. The piano strings, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Anybody see the film of that where they had this bridge that was designed in such a way that the wind whipped through this channel, and the engineers, they really hadn't thought about it. This is sort of like a new concept, but they didn't realize that the wind actually could resonate with the frequency of that bridge, and down it went when the right conditions were present. And basically telling us that anything can be vibrated in and out of existence. With enough amplitude and phase coherence and resonance and so forth. So that leads us right into vibration, which is the third law. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. And there's the classic sine wave, which probably all of you have seen, and it all has to do with amplitudes and frequencies and phases. So you've got high frequencies and low frequencies. You've got low amplitudes and high amplitudes, and then phases. And the combination of all those waves that impinge upon our consciousness, both in terms of the material world and our inner world, our inner mental causal level, all has to do with the harmonics and phase relationships I could get into another detailed discussion with a friend in Australia that's doing some really cool stuff, but I will leave that for another time when I learn more about it. So light isn't one example of vibration. We see one octave out of an infinite number of octaves. And again, we choose how we want to resonate with what we see, what we want what thought system we want to participate in. So we see about an octave out of possibly an infinite number of electromagnetic energy. We, in terms of our physics, at least when I was in school, knew that there were about 80 octaves of light. We see about one octave. We hear about 10 octaves. You know, what else? How else are our vibrational senses unlimited that we don't really usually think about? Okay. And electromagnetics, collapsing and expanding, kind of ties into the law of gender generation, which is electric being masculine, magnetic being feminine, constantly doing the yin-yang dance of collapsing and expanding in and out of each other. Here's an example of how sound and light relate to each other. If you go up 40 octaves, you can relate the notes of the keyboard to the colors in our visible spectrum. And then the things called Lissajous patterns, so the harmonies, the music is all based on that. Beat frequencies, the rhythms, how frequencies interact. Again, tying two laws together, correspondence and vibration. The tones that we find most harmonious and pleasing musically are the ones that have numerical relationships that resonate evenly. And then some of the ones that are kind of interesting are the ones that have the golden ratio patterns as well, that nest very interestingly. So again, so much that can be thought of in terms of vibration, and the key to all of that is the feeling. You know, how do we feel about what we're perceiving, and are we using each moment as an opportunity to forgive or to get upset? And when we're upset, we're using vibration in, one might say, a destructive manner, or a way that at least keeps us stuck in an illusion. A lot of you are probably familiar with the work of Hans Jenne. I know Adam is. And he's got a neat thing called a simoscope that we want to see it, Adam, when it's ready. He's here, yeah, exactly, yeah. A demonstration. This is this technology that basically takes sound and applies it to a membrane that allows you to see dynamically what sound is doing in a very graphic, visual manner. And it's absolutely exquisite, some of the samples he was showing us. Fourth law, polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. Seems like our world could use a dose of that sometimes, huh? But again, where's the world? The world is in us. So the only place to start is numero uno. Another Shakespeare quote, there's nothing good or bad but that thinking makes it so. And I think I might have another subsequent slide, but in case I zip past it here real quick. Also another quote from Caroline Casey. She has a guest on there, Neil Douglas Klotz, who talks about the Aramaic root of the word evil, which in our culture we think, oh, it's, we put all this emotional junk on, right? But in Aramaic, the word, what we call evil, is actually unripe, which kind of gives a whole different flavor to things. I mean, you don't call a kid evil because they haven't learned a certain subject or they haven't grown up to a certain stature, or you look at an unripe piece of fruit and say, oh, it's evil. It's just that's where it is, and it's expansion and unfoldment, and each stage is perfect and beautiful. So anyway, in the law of polarity, growth often occurs by reconciling polarities, seeing two sides of an issue from a third perspective that integrates the two. So the triangle can be a wonderful symbol, and again, there's 4 triangles in that symbol that you saw earlier. So seen from the perspective of two people standing next to each other on Earth, a distant galaxy may look the same, yet seen from the perspective of 2 other galaxies, a distant galaxy may look very different. So that can be a metaphor for understanding when we're seeing things differently, you and quote, another, unquote, person, remember the hologram, it could very well be that you're, in that metaphor, representing those two different galaxies. But if you come around and stand next to the person and see it from their perspective, you narrow the gap. Another example that I like to use on the law of rhythm is if you have two dogs that are fighting. It's interesting, some of the things in nature. What they often will do before they engage in a fight is they'll do a dance around each other to kind of see things from the other person's or the other individual's perspective. And sometimes that eliminates the need for the conflict. Other times it may not, but I think that's kind of a neat metaphor as we kind of spiral around, and that kind of leads into the next one. The three blind men and the elephant is another good example of how we can use the law of polarity to collapse the distance of the non-existent space-time that we appear to be living in. Light and shadow, yin and yang, there's so many different opposites we could use. But if we understand the polarities within ourselves, we have the master key to life. And again, that's one of those 7 laws that can be used as a tool to remembering the oneness. Oh, there it is, the evil being unripe in Aramaic. Here's another quote from Jack Schwartz. When we avoid being vulnerable, we invest our energy in defenses. And the Course talks a lot about defenselessness. And then if we're truly immutable, if we're eternal immortal beings, then there's nothing to defend. And the first line in the phrase in the Course is, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. And then it concludes with, herein lies the peace of God. So it's like, that's kind of profound. And that's sort of the distillation of what we're talking about here. And then when you're in a state of the real rather than the unreal, there's no polarity. There's no opposites. Okay, rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The seasons, the flows of the tides, the phases of the moon, the equinoxes preceding, meandering rivers, all of these are examples, thank you, of the principle of rhythm that allows us to, when we tune into our inner promptings, follow the flow to create a balanced perspective. So as we go through the seasons, we get to see, kind of like the two dogs dancing around each other, we get to see everything from a complete set of perspectives. And if we integrate that, we come to that point of stillness in the center. If we emphasize one part of it, just like, we've got the 12 tribes, the 12 disciples, the 12 signs of the zodiac, if we emphasize one part of anything, any polarity, then we're off balance. But if we return to the alchemical gold in the center, voila, we're off the cycle. We're in the middle of the merry-go-round, and we can enjoy it without getting dizzy. Another quote that I think fits very well nicely with the law of rhythm. The way towards freedom from a situation often lies in the acceptance of the situation. That's from Rachel Naomi Remen. Or as Walter Russell puts it, rhythmic balance interchange between all givings and re-givings. And then I mentioned the electric and magnetic fields, doing this dance. I couldn't resist the Gershwin quote. I got rhythm, I got music, I got starlight. Who could ask for anything more? That's my one and only musical interlude for the evening. Going with the flow, being attuned to the natural cycles, working in alignment with our inner promptings. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to get this really quick. So hopefully I'll have at least a couple of minutes for Q&A. We generally associate the terms of rhythm and eurythmy with the arts of working in the time dimension and the notion of proportion with the arts of space, architecture, painting, decorative art. The Greeks did not care for these distinctions. For them, for Plato in particular, rhythm was a most general concept dominating not only aesthetics but also psychology and metaphysics. And rhythm and number were one. Rhythmos and arrhythmos had the same root, rain, or how do you pronounce that, to flow. That's from a wonderful little book called The Geometry of Art and Life. Planting in the spring, harvesting in the autumn, the set of the sails and off the gales, the Aikido, metaphor of letting people go where they're trying to go rather than getting in their way. The sixth law, cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law unrecognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. And you sow what you reap. Everybody's heard that one. So universal laws that we may not see all the effects of, or the workings of, but we're always experiencing the effects or the ramifications of the operations of those laws, even if we have a limited, tiny little window on the universe, and we don't maybe see the gears behind the the cosmos turning to the full extent. So actually, every effect is connected to an infinite number of causes, and every cause it propagates and mixes into an infinite number of effects. You know, we tend to kind of give, you know, the cause and effect and Descartes, for example, a bum rap. You know, I think, and everybody kind of thinks that, well, it's just, you know, this billiard ball thing, but it's really an incredibly vast, multidimensional matrix of cause and effect. But if we limit it to just isolated parts, then we're kind of missing the whole story. I think the root system of a tree, branches above and the roots below mirroring that structure, is a great metaphor for, you know, the singularity of the now moment. That's the root. Eckhart Tolle might even like that. Okay, so there's sort of a visual depiction of that. So this little symbol you see could be like a bird's eye view of either the roots or the branches of the tree. Or a snail, or a worm's eye view, perhaps. Probably the biggest take-home lesson for me is, and maybe your mileage might be the same, trying to be the causative force in someone else's life. Anybody tried to do that? Discovered it's not terribly effective. We're all working on it, I guess, at some level. Being the champion or the causative force in our own life, much more effective. The seventh law, gender or generation, says gender isn't everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles or aspects. Gender manifests on all planes. So you have an active or transmissive principle, and you have the passive or receptive principle in everywhere you look. One becomes two, becomes one, becomes two. I mean, even the DNA spiraling around, if you look at it, is just doing that sort of thing. And both male and female are contained within woman and man. So we're all both. And if time and space don't exist, then yet another paradox reconciled, right? It integrates the other 6 laws. Electrical and magnetic phenomena, I think, are a perfect example of that too. The yin and the yang. The synthesis of holistic intuitive aspects with directed, goal-oriented masculine aspects. So when we have the masculine and feminine in balance within ourselves, it uses the law of attraction and resonance, and all these other laws come into balance, and we feel peaceful in that moment. You know, there's the yin and yang are no longer, you know, off balance. There's a coherence there. So I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes, because I know we're almost out of time, and I'm going to show you a few examples of how we can get involved in these hallucinations, the holograms. And if we're really multidimensional, then we can use a few metaphors. Here's some examples of, this is actually a 4-dimensional object that, to get a little bit into the math again, I didn't want to get too heavy into it this evening, but this is what's called a polychora, which is a 4-dimensional shape, and you're actually seeing a 2-dimensional representation of it here. But probably more interesting are some animations that a friend of mine named Russell Toll created. On each of these animations on both sides, and you see a snapshot of another one in the middle, are actually, each frame of these animations are a slice through a 4-dimensional object, a 3-dimensional slice through a 4-dimensional object. So you can kind of imagine how the fact that each frame smoothly transitions to the next one. So even in terms of modern physics and mathematics, there are other dimensions that are completely consistent that say, there's other dimensions out there, and even all this is still part of the hologram. It's part of the incredibly amazing multidimensional illusion that we're fabricating moment to moment. Here's a couple more. I just think these are beautiful to watch. And again, the parts of the vast multidimensional nature of what we are, that, you know, we see this little tip of the iceberg, and here's yet 2 more, and I think we're about done. So I just wanted to leave you with some ideas that, you know, even within the hologram, there's other dimensions that we're just gradually becoming aware of. And using that principle of quantum forgiveness, we can undo the unconscious stuff by consciously practicing the releasing of the grievances and recognizing the illusion of space-time, however many dimensions we happen to be referring to. So how much time do we have for Q&A? Like a minute? 3 minutes! Yay! I actually finished before 9. Cool. So anyway, I'm accessible this way if you have other questions, since I didn't have a lot of time, as well as right now.
What was the book you were referring to? The Kabbalion? Kabbalion?
Yeah.
Is that Egyptian?
Actually, supposedly was written by, or authored by, Hermes Trismegistus, who was allegedly the architect of the Great Pyramid and the creator of alchemy and astronomy and medicine and so many other sciences. That he was allegedly the one that put all these things down and note-taking, scribing, what do they call it? All that stuff. But it's called the Kabbalion, not to be confused with the Kabbalah, which is the book is Kyballion, and it's a neat little book, and it's a quick read, and it's deceptively profound. Yeah. Anyone else?
I was wondering if multidimensionality is another opportunity for forgiveness.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Exactly. Of course it is. Yeah. Because all of these all the aspects of the hologram, even the levels that we're not aware of with our little tunnel vision, are all part of the illusion. So we have opportunities to release the grievances and the resentments and all that stuff by thinking of all that, even on other dimensions, is out there. It's all in here. It's all
Same with duality.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I have a question. Yeah. That animation that we just saw, was that a 4-dimensional
yes.
thing passing through a 2-dimensional space or a 3-dimensional space?
It's a 4-dimensional model, but he chose to depict it so that we could grok it, since 4D kind of warps our brains a bit. He chose to depict it as a series of 3-dimensional slices through a 4-dimensional model. So each frame of the animation, if you can imagine that, is a 3-dimensional slice through a 4-dimensional model.
I can sort of imagine that.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's like okay, using that bent ruler to measure the curved ruler to measure the curved line is like, it's kind of hard to grok. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Anyone else?
When you were first showing the things that it appeared to me as disc, and then I kind of got this idea they were just like CD or DVD disc, and then it occurred to me that DVD disc is more than just a DVD disc. It is information.
Right.
It is made of a certain material.
Absolutely.
It is circular, so it is symbolic.
Sure.
And just and then if you spin it, you've got a sphere,
A rhythm and
and
vibrations.
if you stack it,
Yeah.
you've got multiple information.
Right.
And when we observe or listen to, we add into what's on it. So it was like a little universe on
Absolutely.
the one symbol.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, and we can use anything as a symbol for feeling that interconnectedness and our intrinsic unity. And anything can be used for the thought system that brings us home.
Yeah. And the thing that got me going is on the first symbol here. It has all those little compartments, and I was thinking of the old floppies, how you had to format them so they would start and stop their information and everything, and then boy, it just took off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, make more and more dense.
The whole world.
Yep.
Or universe.
More and more dimensions encoded, so to speak. Yeah.
We're just one big CD disc.
All right. Well, we're good. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, and thank you. Thank you.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.